Hi everyone, welcome back to episode 18 of the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. Today's guest is Simon Moran. Simon grew up in Whitley Bay in the northeast of England. He eventually found his way to Japan in 1995. He worked for a small English school until 1998 and then started out on his own. He started his franchising business in 2003, and at the time of recording he has 12 schools in Japan. He is also a blogger and an author, and some of his websites are happyvalley.tv and modernenglish.net. I had a great chat with Simon about the options for entrepreneurs in franchising.
Hey everyone, buckle up for a new episode of the EFL Magazine Business Podcast, the one and only podcast made to help you launch your business or take your existing business to a level of success you could never have imagined. Whether you're a school owner, freelancer, publisher, or other entrepreneur, you're sure to pick up lots of actionable advice when you listen to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. Remember to visit eflmagazine.com for great articles and features. Without further ado, here's your host, the founder of EFL Magazine, Philip Pound.
Okay, so hello everybody. Welcome back to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. Today, I'm delighted to have Simon Moran, and Simon is the CEO founder at Modern English, and he's an entrepreneur creator. He also is a publisher for Happy Valley, and he's a franchisor, and he's a blogger. To be honest, he's got a lot of things going on, Simon. So I really looking forward to having a chat with him. How are you today, Simon?
I'm good. Thanks, Philip. Thanks for having us on. Finally got around to talking to you. Sorry, I've been putting you off so many times up till now, but
no problem.
Pleased to finally be here. Looking forward.
Yeah, I'm pleased to meet you. You're in Osaka, is that right?
I actually live in Kyoto, but the office is in Osaka. I live up in the hills in Kyoto, quite near to Nara, and drive into the office, which is in Hirakata in Osaka. Yeah.
Okay, and I suppose I'll go back to the beginning. I'm having a look at your blog. So your blog is, just to kind of name check these things, is Moran actually. So your name is, we had a little chat about this before your name is Moran, not Moran.
Yeah, it's Moran actually, yeah. So obviously coming from England, I'm from Whitley Bay near Newcastle in the northeast of England. Coming from England, it's more common to say Moran, so that's what people say. So that's been my stock response ever since I went to school, really. It's Moran actually. And, you can, it's fine, completely fine for people not to know how to say it. But so that's Moran actually, that comes from me saying, actually, it's Moran. So you can imagine how that goes sometimes. But it's moranactually.com, readers.
Okay. And I'm just having a look at it here. You have a background in blogging. I believe you were in, was it Time Out Kansai?
Kansai Time Out, yeah. So actually more of a background, part-time freelance journalism. I started writing for the Kansai Time Out in 1998, I think, and I was a contributor and then Osaka correspondent. I edited the travel section, the Japan travel section, and then was associate editor for a while and was involved with the Kansai Time Out from 1998 until it folded, which was, I think, 2009. And it was great. It was, I had a lot of fun doing that, made a lot of good friends. It was, it was only sort of part-time freelance, but I've also written for The Guardian, the Japan Times, Mojo 442, and most importantly, Scootering magazine, which is a great magazine about scooters.
Oh, I see. Okay. So is it fair to say you've kind of got the mod background? Is that your
modern English? Yeah. You might have noticed there are targets on everything that I do. Yeah. And so I wrote an article initially for the Kansai Time Out, but rewrote it for scootering.com. I wrote an article about mods in Japan and their scooters, which they spend a lot of money on. I know a guy who paid like 1 million yen for a refurbished Land Rover.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I don't know if you know much about scooters, but
I know a little bit. I have a friend living in Korea, and he was a mod, or is a mod. But actually, I've seen his Facebook profile, and he now has a motorbike. So
I
has he changed? What
happened? It's gone over at the dark side. It's a very interesting point, though. You say there was a mod, is a mod. Corrected yourself very quickly, because I don't think it's something that leaves you. I'll be buried in mod. In fact, I've written specific instructions for the suit that I'll be buried in, which is one that I had tailor made. But I'm not sure this is the direction you want to take the podcast.
No. Please, it is interesting, and because it kind of leads on to Whitley Bay.
Yeah.
You know, when we think of mods and rockers, was it at Brighton Beach? There mods and rockers rumbling in Whitley Bay?
There certainly was. There always used to be scooter rallies. There was like bank holidays, and the scooter rallies used to come down to Whitley Bay. This would have been when I was a teenager, sort of early 80s. Scooters were also ridden by psychobillies, so you had this kind of interesting mix of mods, skinheads, and psychobillies. And there'd be a bit of violence. You know, we used to go down. Whitley Bay, for those that don't know, is a seaside town. So it has a fun fair, or had a fun fair, and amusement arcades around it. So we used to go down there dressed as mods and in our parkas. And we used to get attacked by skinheads. I've been in fights because I was a mod. It's quite bizarre. I've run away from more fights than I've been in, I have to say, because that's the first thing that you need to do, I think, is avoid violence rather than get involved in it. But
and just a quick thing on this, would it be fair to call it a subculture or culture?
I would call it a subculture, and that's basically what I wrote about. You know, I think on my blog I will be putting up my previous writings for the KT and other stuff, and that's what I wrote about. You know, this it's a British English and initially a London subculture started by the North London Jewish population, essentially largely in the late 50s, which grew into, you know, the mods and rockers that we all know, and that was transported to Japan probably by the Jam touring here in the late 70s, early 80s, and was adopted. And you know what Japanese people are like? If they get into something, they get into it to the nth degree. So I went to this Mods Mayday event down in the Bay there. I can't remember the name of the venue. And you basically had groups of people that represented the whole of the original mod subculture from the late 50s. So some people were quiffs, who were, you know, ardent R&B rarities collectors, and these guys that I met that had these amazing scooters, you know, and it was a real eye-opener. I mean, it was quite bizarre, but it was great, you know. And there was a bar opened up in Kyoto called the Weller's Bar, which I found when I was researching that, and went along there, and some of these mod guys came along on their scooters and stuff, and that was great. So that got written up in Mojo magazine, so that was really good. So the writing, writing was always something that I'd had an interest in, and I wrote a book about the World Cup in 2002, which was published by SU Press, who published the Kansai Time Out, and it was something I considered going into for quite a while, actually, but made the decision not to. This will probably come up when we start talking about starting the school of franchising. But I was doing all of that, writing here in Japan. So arrived in 95, started writing in 98. Around about the same time, I quit my last job and started my first school. So I was doing the two things parallel for a while. But the only writing I do really now is on my blog, and I haven't been very active on my blog for quite a long time either. So I need to restart that.
Okay, so I haven't read your book. Sorry about that. I just found out about it today.
Doesn't put you in a very exclusive group.
Okay. You know, the interviewers should read all the books, but like Alan Partridge, I never read the books. But it says it is very interesting subtitle. It says nationalism versus internationalism.
Yeah.
What's that about?
Well, the idea of the book was obviously it's a kind of travelogue through Japan via the World Cup, and you know, there's that famous all-world quote about sport being war minus the shooting, you know, and if anything represents cheerful nationalism, it's sporting contests, you know, and so I wanted to look very briefly sort of those conflicting ideas. You know, Japan is always talking about internationalism, and the World Cup was a great opportunity, like the Olympics were, you know, in the 60s, like the Osaka Expo was in 1970, and the World Cup in 2002. You know, the modernization and the internationalization of Japan. So it was looking at those two conflicting things and how it would play out. Now, of course, coming from England, and if anybody reads the book, they'll realise that I'm not actually that ardent fan of the England football team. But coming from England, we have a terrible reputation of being hooligans, and this was a big concern for people. So how is it going to play out? Were they going to be met by the nationalists in the sound trucks asking them to revere the emperor and driving the hairy barbarians back? But actually, it was an international festival of fun, and there wasn't. I think. The quote on the cover is something like there wasn't a single arrest for a public order offence during the 2002 World Cup. So it was that idea of looking at somebody's drive, how much does nationalism drive them to support their team, and then how does that play against this international mix? So, England got to play Argentina. We get the Falklands War all over again on the football pitch, and stuff like that. Japan played Russia. There are territorial conflicts between Russia and Japan as well, So looking very briefly at those, it was more a travelogue around Japan, looking at the football and sampling beer, really.
Okay.
It's available on Amazon, and you can contact me directly for a signed copy.
And what's the name of the book again?
We Are Nippon.
We Are Nippon. Okay.
Yeah, which is one of the chants that the Japanese fans were singing.
Okay, so I'm going to move on to kind of more teaching things here, because this podcast, I'm sure we could do a Joe Rogan here at 3 hours. But so tell me how you got into teaching and what started that.
Well, I think I've said this before. I kind of arrived in Japan in the spirit of a fruit picker, really. I'd been traveling for a bit before that. I had about 2.5 years when I was in Thailand, Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, back to England, and then came over to Japan. And the idea of being an EFL teacher was that it would give me a portable skill to allow me to travel and see more of the world, particularly more of Asia. I was very interested in spending more time in Asia. I spent quite a long time in Australia and New Zealand, which, is former parts of the British Empire, now parts of the Commonwealth. The culture is very familiar. Obviously, in Thailand, it wasn't familiar at all. And in Hong Kong, there was this fantastic mix of local Chinese culture and British culture as well. So I was very interested in spending more time in Asia. I had these rather grand notions of immersing myself in a foreign country, culture, and language. It sounds ridiculous now, but and so I was in England. It was cold and miserable, and I didn't have very much money at all. And I basically faced a choice of, was I going to do the CELTA, which would have taken up all of my money, or was I going to buy an airplane ticket and arrive with some money in my pocket? So I spoke to a few people I knew in Japan, and so I didn't do the CELTA, so I just bought one-way ticket and arrived in Japan in, I think, September 95. Managed to get a job, and then realized pretty quickly that I didn't have a clue what I was doing. And so there was a friend of mine at the time who had his Delta. He was a trainer and materials writer for ECC. So I got him to basically run me through the equivalent of a CELTA. There was a few of us that did it. He was great, and that was fantastic. And so sort of became a teacher at a private language school. That was kind of semi-full-time. Started getting private lessons here and there, and slowly started getting into learning the language.
Okay, so you started off with it's kind of traditional route, isn't it? I mean, you probably know Ian Simpson and Peter Lackner.
I do know Peter, yeah.
And I've interviewed before, and I think Ian came as a high school teacher, and right. he started his own enterprise here. Yeah. But like a lot of people that come to Japan, it's you start in Eikaiwa with private language school, and right. you kind of develop from there. So
that was me, yeah, that was me for sure, yeah. And at that time, I really had no ambitions of anything at all. I was only 27 or 28 or something, and didn't really have any ambitions at all, and just thought it might be a laugh,
And what happened then? You decided you were a little bit underqualified. You didn't really know what you were doing, so you decided to get more seriously into.
Yeah. So going through that training, and so that guy was doing like a basic private TESOL certificate. So doing that just put a completely different, just made me such a much better teacher. And that meant that I was doing a much better job. I was never super confident with very young learners. Didn't have much experience with kids at the time, and I think that's one of the problems with the industry here is that people will be recruited because of their native language or their nationality, and their, degree qualification and minimum training are thrown into language classrooms, and they haven't got a clue what they're doing, really.
Yeah.
And so then I did another TESOL certificate after that, and I think I worked at that school for 2.5 years or something like that, and I had quite a few private lessons and here and there, and I just I was just fed up with being an employee. I think I just fancied doing my own thing, and so I did. And this all sort of coincided with there was the France World Cup in 1998. I quit my job in May of that year, and then I started writing my first article for the Kansai Time Out around about the same time, I think, and quit my last job and started just teaching from home. You had Dean Rogers on here, and he was talking about this the other day, that, if you can start with the base of students that you're already teaching, it's certainly going to be easier for you to branch out into a school if that's what you want to do. And I had that through my private students, so I was teaching at home and in a spare room in my house. And laughingly now, looking back at it, I used to do everything. A friend used to help me write the copy. I would advertise on a local magazine, Pado, for those that know it. And I would answer the telephone and do the initial sales calls in Japanese. And I don't know how I had the nerve to do it, quite frankly. It was my Japanese is obviously much better now, but I wouldn't answer the phone now to a sales call. No way, But I guess I was driven because I had to do it. There was nobody else around.
So it was backs against the wall.
Backs against the wall, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, very quickly, I had a very decent income very, very quickly, and a very nice sort of timetable. Working from home, cycling to a few places, and I think there was a couple of jobs I used to go and do on the train. So I was kind of like, independent teacher, a grammarian gun for hire, I think is how I termed it in one of my blog articles. And it was very, very simple setup. Did everything myself. Collected fees in cash. Sometimes we cycling around with like 300,000 yen in an envelope. And I thought, actually, this is possibly something I could do, So, but
only in Japan could you do that? Could you feel
well,
safe?
I wonder,
Yeah.
I know. I mean, the pay might be different. I don't know, but I know plenty of people who've done that, say in Spain or Italy, who've set up their own thing there as well. In terms of the safety aspect, possibly yes. But again, at the time, I wasn't really thinking seriously about this. It was, I'd made the decision not to be employed anymore because I just wasn't happy, and I became self-employed, and that was quite good. At the time, so 98, late 98, I didn't know whether I was going to stay in Japan or not at that time. So, it wasn't like I planned a massive franchise organization from day one. But we don't have a massive franchise organization, so I achieved that on plan.
It's often people who plan big things don't end up with them, but people who plan small things, they end up growing exponentially, don't they? I
mean, I was reacting to my situation, and I could see that there was potential to do other things. And so come 1999, I got married, moved out of the apartment I was in, converted that into 3 classrooms, took on other teachers and staff. And again, really wasn't thinking much about expanding then. One of my former students did some admin and reception work for me, hired an Australian teacher, and hired people to do the kids' classes, really, because I wasn't very confident teaching very young learners. And sort of did that for a while. And then the opportunity came up to get involved with somebody else and run a branch. So we did that for a while, and it wasn't a complete disaster, but I didn't enjoy it. And logistically, there were a few problems with it. It was geographically quite close to what became the head school. But in terms of the train lines, you had to go sort of via Hexham, as it were. Which nobody will get that reference, but basically you had to go into
Kyoto. No,
anyway. Ignore it. It's you basically had to because it was like over some hills, and there wasn't a direct train line. You had to go into Kyobashi and change and go out again. So it was quite difficult and expensive route. So it wasn't as flexible to have teachers teaching in 2 locations as I'd hoped it was. And I can't remember exactly what happened. Nothing bad happened, but I didn't particularly enjoy that. I didn't particularly enjoy employing those teachers, and I didn't particularly enjoy having a partner. There's nothing wrong with him; he was a good guy. And I think the lease came up on the premises, and it wasn't doing particularly great, and so we just decided to cut our losses. And from then, basically, I kind of decided that I didn't want to have branches. I didn't really want to have branch schools. So this is probably at this time, if this would be maybe early 2000, I guess. I would have to check the dates. And so I just continued doing the freelance writing and building up the school. By this time, the Korean school had moved into premises near the station. We had 3 classrooms, a couple of receptionists. And I think we moved in there late 2000, early 2001. And we had like 25 students join in January 2001 or something. And it was a very good time to open a school. And that really took off. And all of a sudden we were really, really busy at that head school. And so I thought about opening another branch, and then I remembered my earlier experience with branches and decided not to do that. Was very involved with the Kansai Time Out at the time, and then wrote the book. And then so doing the book in the summer of 2002, I took a couple of months off, about 3 months off, I think, maybe 2, to do prep for the book, and then 4 weeks traveling around Japan. Going to the World Cup. I was very lucky. I got a press pass from FIFA. And so I attended, I think, 14 games or something like that. And then wrote that up. So it took me 6 weeks to write the book. So I was back teaching at this point. So I'd get up in the morning, do some writing, go to school, do teaching, stay at school, do more writing, writing full on the weekends. So that was a very, very busy time. And during the travel for the World Cup, I got to know a lot more journalists, and there's a friend of mine who was at the Daily Yomiuri at the time had said, yeah, come down to Tokyo, I'll get you a job at the Daily Yomiuri. And I just didn't fancy it. You know, it was, I don't know if you know much about the Daily Yomiuri. I don't particularly like the newspaper and its politics, but the entry-level job is basically a rewriting job. So you get the translated stories and have to rewrite them. And it didn't seem particularly interesting. And a lot of journalists I met are very cynical. And
yeah, I find just think about the articles. I've read some of the Yomiuri articles. They're directed in or they're translated in a Japanese way. They don't read really well in English, in my opinion.
A lot of them don't. I mean, if it's the translated stuff, a lot of them are not that great, you know. But then, so this other friend, he became a features editor, so he commissioned his own section. That was really, really good. Lots of music and culture and stuff. That was actually a really, really good section. But I basically made the decision that I didn't want to become a journalist, not a print journalist anyway. I still enjoyed writing, but I didn't want to become a print journalist. So I guess I made that decision in 2002 and decided to concentrate on the business. And we opened up our first franchise in April 2003.
Okay, so I wanted to go back a little bit. There's a few things I want to touch on there. And the first one was you had an aversion because you had a bad experience of, you know, branch school and something unforeseen happened or something you hadn't accounted for, basically, that the train lines were, as you said, hexamed, or, you know, there's a hexam situation.
Yeah, a hexam, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of very similar, I think, to a lot of entrepreneurs or people that they encounter these things. And I feel this myself in that, you know, we're running a conference on TOEFL teaching in August. Just a bit of a plug there, but of course I'm doing most of the stuff, so I have to do all the, you know, commission speakers and organize and advertise, and of course I have interns are putting in some great help. But the fear is I'm going to miss a lot of things.
Yeah,
you know, I'm like, there's stuff there that it's just going to be a disaster because I didn't pick up on this part, that part. Is that how you felt? It was like, I'm going to start a school and there's something I'm missing, and it's a kind of a underlying fear I have.
With that branch, it was already an existing school and it was advertised for sale. So I went along to have a look at it. And I'm not sure if I would have chosen that location, but that was by the by, really. Speaking to the owner, we came up with the idea of a modern English branch. And so the location was already set. I didn't choose the location. I think naively, I thought it would have been easier to send teachers between the two schools than it actually was. We had a little bit of difficulty with telephones. We weren't as well set up then as we were now. But yeah, I mean, essentially, we were making it up as we go along. I obviously took from what we were doing at our school and applied it. But yeah, realized that we certainly needed to be a lot more organized. Having a partner is not easy. It's not for everybody, I don't think. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with the guy at all. We got on very, very well. But, you've got to ask if it's a 50-50 partnership, and if anybody's listening, never go into a 50-50 partnership, at least be a minority or a majority partner, one of the two.
I'm in a 50-50 partnership.
Yeah. It can be difficult. Well, the point is, if you disagree and you have to make a decision, what do you do? And so I've had people who've part-owned franchises before, and I've always said to them that I will only accept this if you nominate a referee that you will go to if you reach deadlock. Because you've got to be able to move forward. Legally, probably it doesn't make that much difference, but personally, you've got to be able to make a decision. Now, I didn't really have that problem with that guy at all, but I wasn't there at school every day, and I didn't have the direct ownership of it that I did at my own school, and there was nobody in ownership of the school who was out there handing out flyers, for example, just to take one example. So it wasn't as easy to manage as the one that I was directly in charge of. So I think that was the thing with it. So the numbers weren't increasing there in the way that they were at the other school. And so, the lease, I think it was the lease came up, we just decided to pull the plug. So yeah, so I certainly learned a lot from that. And I'm glad it happened. Nobody didn't lose any money, didn't make any money, but we didn't lose any money. And I think the students all managed to find somewhere else to go. The teachers I was sending, so they still had work with me. But yeah, it made me think about branches and logistics and locations and all of that. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. The second thing I wanted to pick up on was training. This is a thing obviously you feel strongly about, because just looking through your pages, you want somebody at least to be TESOL qualified, to come in and work for you. Right. But the argument is always there that teachers should be have CELTA, Delta. But my argument, as I put to a lot of people putting forward this opinion, is that it's quite expensive, and being a teacher is not a lucrative position. So for example, when you're beginning, like you had the choice between the flight and the CELTA. Now, some people have the luxury, of money and time, and they can do the CELTA over the month and then take the flight, and everything's hunky dory. But if you're in like a job that's sometimes not so well paid, that asking the teacher to pay for a training course is quite difficult. Do you think the school should share the cost of training, or at least provide good training for the teacher?
We now only recruit teachers who are already qualified. So that decision has already been made, and that does a couple of things. I mean, there is a huge variety of TESOL courses. Ideally, we would recruit somebody who had the CELTA or equivalent Trinity or TESOL Canada or something. And it's the practica there that I think that are the most valuable thing in that. But if we are recruiting somebody who, for example, has the CELTA, they've already made that decision themselves. They've already taken it seriously, and they're already invested in their profession. And that's what we want to look at it as a profession. You wouldn't take somebody out of university and put them into an elementary school job as a teacher without having any teacher training or teacher qualifications. So no, I don't think the onus is on the employer to provide the training for the trainee to be able to do the job from day one. I mean, you wouldn't if you were going to get somebody to come around and plaster your house, you wouldn't pay for their plastering training, would you?
Sure.
I think for ongoing professional development, it's a completely different scenario. In the past, we have employed people who've got a lot of teaching experience, good classroom experience. They've been through our interview process, and we've asked them to get a TESOL. And then once they're TESOL qualified, we increase their pay, so they're motivated to do it. Most of those TESOL qualifications that people are doing are without practica and will be done online. And there's a huge variety of some very, very bad ones and some fairly decent ones. So we ask for that minimum commitment for them to do that work on their own, so they get the background knowledge, which you could look up on Google anyway, and then we'll increase their pay, and then we pay for them to do their practica if they don't have them.
And who could you recommend? What good names are for training for teachers to train? You said there's some good ones and some bad ones.
For the certificates, I think for the TESOL certificates, the ones that you can do online, I think TESOL Canada are very good ones online. And if you could buy one on Groupon for like $200 or something, it's not going to be worth
cheaper than that. I think $50 now.
Right. But that's obviously not going to be worth very much at all. I think they've all got a bit of background in it. We have seen a couple where one of our staff went through and corrected all the typos and the grammatical errors. And there's some really, really bad ones. TESOL Canada, I think TESOL.org, the American organization, recommends some. The British Council have some great materials online. CELTA and Trinity are probably the benchmark, and there are places you can do those here in Japan, but yeah, they are a bit costly. But we will take somebody with, so we've just hired somebody who has a TESOL 160-hour TESOL certificate from a college in LSC who had a relationship with TESOL Canada. She didn't actually do her practica, but we're going to do her practica in-house. So we work with CELTA and Delta qualified trainers on a freelance basis, and we can do in-house practica. And there are organizations in Japan that can do that as well. If you look at ITDI, for example, they have some good training programs.
Our friends in ITDI, itdi.pro. So if you want to go to, also a sponsor of the TOEFL conference coming up, which is also a great opportunity for professional development as well. So we've got some great speakers there.
I don't actually know them. I've met Steve Herder very briefly in a bar. I think the other guy is Philip Shigeo Brown. I don't think I've met him, but Catherine Littlehill, who we used to work with and was the author on Happy Valley, she was involved with them for a while. So I'm sure they know their onions. I don't know what they do with very young learners, for example. I think that's an area in Japan. I think that's an area in EFL generally that needs better training and qualifications. If we go back to talking about the CELTA, the CELTA doesn't have an automatic young learners component. So, for example, if you go to St Giles in London or somewhere to do your CELTA, you can do an optional young learners certificate after that, which is a very, very good idea, especially if you're going to be teaching in Asia. But I think, that's something that needs addressing. I think standards generally need addressing in ELL. If we used to have a part ownership of a school in Edinburgh in Scotland, and for example, if you want to be a host family, you have to go through police background checks because you could be dealing with children. And most schools ask for a background check for their teachers as well. In Korea and China, teachers need a background check. In Japan, anybody can walk into any job anywhere. They won't necessarily have any teaching qualifications, and there's no requirement for background checks. So you could get an unqualified person in terms of teaching, and you haven't checked their criminal background, and you could throw them in with children aged 6 and 7 the next day.
That's already happening with Japanese teachers, isn't it? Some of them have offenses and they're still teaching. I read it a few months ago, but it's very lax.
It is lax, and I think it needs addressing. I think it needs addressing. I really do.
Okay, so let's move on. To more about the business end of things. So your school, you decided to centralize rather than decentralize. So you built up a big school, and then tell me about more branches and moving to being a franchisor.
The idea with the franchising was having looked at that experience with a branch, but then looking back at the experience I had when I went from an employed teacher to a self-employed teacher, all of a sudden, once I was self-employed, everything just meant so much more. I like to think that I was a hard worker anyway, but it meant so much more when it was for me. My work rate increased, my attention to detail increased. I looked after my students a lot more. I like to think I did a decent job before, a good job, in fact, before that. But I think it's inevitable that when it's your own, depending on your personality, I suppose, but when it's your own, it means so much more to you. So the idea was to recreate that, but support people in a way that I didn't have the support in 1998 when I was answering the telephone and doing the flyers myself. So the idea was to help foreign teachers run their own school because they're self-motivated, and I want them to be self-motivated. And I believe that everybody benefits when the person receiving the student fees when they're as close as possible to the student in the chain, if you like. So if the teacher is receiving the fees from the student, there's a much, much closer relationship than if they're employed by a big organization. And it doesn't matter if the students leave. But then to support foreigners do things they couldn't do, such as answer the telephone. So that was the idea behind coming up with the franchise. So we advertised in the Kansai flea market at the time, which was a free paper, had an inquiry and opened up the first franchise in March or April 2003.
2003. Wow. So almost 20 years there.
Yeah. It's what 2000, what is it? 2021
2021 now, yeah.
18 years we've been franchising, yeah. So between 2003 and 2007, when I moved out of Osaka and moved into the house in Kyoto that we're in now, when I moved here, we opened 2 new franchises the same month that I moved, same week that I moved. In fact, it was a crazy week. And we have 14 schools at that point.
Wow.
Yeah, that was weird. That was very pleasing. I think you have to look at, timing. It plays a massive part, probably the biggest part in launching any business. And that it was an incredibly vibrant market at the time, from 2003, 2007, 2005, 2006, probably. And at that point, we hadn't had a single failure. And we would open schools and they were successful. It was great. We had a great time doing all that. It was really, really good.
Wow. So you went from a failure of a branch school to having no failures. So it was obviously a great learning experience.
Yeah. I think it's important to highlight that. So this is at that time when we opened school number 14 in April 2007. We hadn't had a single failure. By the autumn of 2008, we did have our first failure for a franchise. And I don't know if you remember that far back, but I think it was it the August or the September of 2007, Nova went bust. There'd been a drop in the market before that, which we had seen, but I don't think we'd anticipate how brutal it was going to be. And Nova went bust. There was a lot. Just to wind back a little bit further, a lot of people had ridden on Nova's national TV advertising. They created a huge amount of awareness for everybody, and everybody did well out of that. You can say anything you like about Nova. I know some great teachers that came from Nova, and I know people that have learned to speak English fluently at Nova. They get a bad rep as a company from some people, but they did a lot of good as well. But then they went bust, and that created a terrible, terrible image of ACAR, private language schools. And I think it was either September or October of 2007 was the only month in history at head school in Korean that we didn't recruit a single student. Oh. And the world changed from then. The private language school world changed dramatically. Somewhere back on my blog, I've got a graph, and you can look at the figures, and around then it goes off a cliff face. And estimates range between 40 and 60% of the total market was lost at that time. And so timing is such a crucial part of it. So in the April of 2007, we'd opened 2 new locations, one in Uehomachi in Osaka and one in Motomachi in Kobe. The Kobe school was closed in a year, and the Uehomachi school still exists and is doing really, really well. And so timing is crucial, but then obviously location is the thing after that. And then there's the person doing it. So what we always say with the franchising is that by definition, the only things that are different between any franchise are the location and the owner, the person doing it. Those are the only 2 things that are different. And so, well, and the timing, I guess, but so Motomachi was, I think, the wrong person in the wrong place at the wrong time, with hindsight, and Uehomachi survived because it was a good location and a good owner. So you have to be aware of those things. You'd asked about location, like timing, location, and person are the 3 key things.
Okay, fantastic, because you've anticipated my next question. So to become a franchisee, where should you be? What sort of person do you see as being the successful franchisee?
Yeah, that's a very, very good question, and we were less cautious about this than we are now when we first started, because everything was going so well. And I think the difference between somebody who wants to do everything themselves and a franchisee is somebody who wants to take advantage of a proven product or a proven system. They're still entrepreneurs. They still take the financial risk, and they have to develop a business. But opening up a franchise, whether it's a product franchise or a service franchise, and this is something that people should look into if they're interested. If you walked out, you're in Tokyo, right?
Tokyo, yeah. Just
whereabouts are you?
Nishi Tokyo. It's on the Seibu-Ikebukuro line, kind of near to Kurosawa, not so big.
I can guarantee if you get off the train at your local station and you tap somebody on the shoulder and say, "Have you heard of Modern English?" They'll say no, because we are not a national known brand. So if you open a Lawson franchise or a McDonald's franchise, people know who you are. That's not what we offer. So we offer we're a basic service franchise or a teacher or an operator franchise. And so for a franchisee, you have to understand clearly the relationship between franchisor and franchisee. Both parties have to understand this. And the franchisee should be aware of what the franchisor is offering. In our case, the services that we provide. They should be aware of their obligations and the franchisor's obligations, but they should be in a position or a mindset to take advantage of a proven product and implement it in an area that they choose, basically a location that they choose. And it saves you so much work from starting from scratch. If you wanted to start a school from scratch, you've got to do everything from day one. You don't have a classroom. You don't have a curriculum. You don't have anything. And you've got to do everything from scratch. So it's a huge time saver. But you also, as a franchisee, you also have to realize that you can't do everything that you want, because the franchisor is going to have requirements. Can I change your logo to pink, for example? No, you can't. I'm afraid it's a trademark. And then obviously in terms of operations, because we operate a call center, we run systems which are pretty prescribed. And if people don't stick to those, they can go awry. So we have requirements for people to act in certain ways. Pretty simple directions to follow. But if you're of the personality where you want to do everything yourself and you don't like being told what to do, being a franchisee is probably not a good call for you. If you realize that a franchise could be a profitable enterprise for you as a teacher, owner, operator, or you wanted to open multiple franchises and run those, and you can see the value of the product and the services and look at it as a business, well, then it probably is a good decision for you.
Okay, so before deciding to become a franchisee, so due diligence, or Americans say due diligence, I don't know. So what's the process there? Take me through that.
Yeah, I mean, so if somebody comes to us, they'll have seen one of our ads, or they'll have heard about us somehow, and they'll send in an inquiry. And it really is up to them to do their due diligence on us. And they should look at what we're offering. They have to make a decision whether it's right for them. For any franchisee, potential franchisee looking at any franchisor, ours or others, I would say that, you want to be able to see the franchise agreement. You want a copy of that. You want to be able to go through it in detail. You want to be able to run it past a lawyer. You want to make sure that you understand what your obligations will be and what the franchisor's obligations will be. You should have clearly explained any questions that you have and be satisfied with the answers so that you understand them, because there will be a declaration in the agreement that says that you've read it and you fully understand it. If it was me, I would want to be able to speak to other franchisees, and a franchisee should always write their own business plan as well. For a franchisor, you've got to make a decision on whether the person or the company that you're going to be working with is the right fit for you. And we've learned a lot about that along the way. Sometimes in the hard way. It's not for everybody, that's for sure. It really isn't.
And what difficulties come up then in the relationship between franchisor and franchisee?
Yeah, from the franchisor's point of view, you've really got to make sure that the person has the right personality, and that they understand the relationship. And you have to be confident that you can both go ahead and develop this. If somebody doesn't want to follow the operations manual, if they want to do their own things and they don't want to consult head office on that, that is going to cause problems. If a franchisee refuses to, for example, accept scheduling decisions that are made by head office, it's going to cause problems, and that has happened to us in the past. We had a very, very bad experience with one franchise about, how long ago was that? I don't know, about 14 years ago. And, we both did due diligence. Everything was looking pretty good. He was an aggressive guy, wanted to build up his school. Everything seemed good. I had a little indication in training when we were doing the free trial training that things might not be as smooth as they could be, because we'd been through the free trial training with him, and then he just disregarded that and did his own thing altogether. I thought at the time he was just trying to show off, which was okay. But then we opened up, and we were getting loads of students. It was developing really well, and then I don't know. Something seemed to snap somewhere, and he just started behaving in a very, very uncooperative, belligerent, obstructive way, in fact. And it became personal to some of my staff, and then to me. And he was just refusing to accept scheduling issues. Wrote and told us that he would refuse to accept this one woman coming for a lesson again at that time. This woman was 8 months pregnant at the time, but he was going to lock the door and not let her in. And it was really quite brutal. So we had to make a decision as to what we wanted to do, So we tried just going through the agreement and procedures and saying, well, this is what we agreed, this is what you didn't do. Ended up being letters from my lawyer, and we just weren't getting anywhere. Disputes can kind of grow a personality of their own. And that's certainly what happened in this case. So we just made the decision that we couldn't do this anymore. Called him up for a meeting at our lawyer's office and told him that we were terminating the franchise agreement. We made him an offer to buy him out, which was a very good offer at the time, which he refused, and then he emptied the school and ran away. We had to take it over. And then at the time, the franchise agreement had an arbitration clause in it, which went to the International Court of Arbitration in Lausanne, I think, in Switzerland.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, the idea of that was that it could all be done in English with one arbitrator in Japan rather than go through the Japanese courts. So easier for two foreigners to work in English in that way. And then this case file from Lausanne arrived, and it was inches thick. And in the end, we did settle. We paid him less than half our original offer. We took direct control of the school. We were running from head office anyway, sending teachers up there. And we put a teacher in there from head office. We sold it on later on. It's still in existence now. But it's an example of the wrong person in the wrong organization. It wasn't good for him, it wasn't good for us, and it wasn't good for the students. Everybody lost, So we certainly learned from that we have to be very, very careful who we want to work with. That's an extreme case, that's a very, very extreme case. But, it can happen.
And getting into the nuts and bolts of the relationship, how is risk managed? How is equity? Tell me a little bit, your system, other systems, or franchising.
What sort of risk in particular?
So, for example, in this situation, if there's insurance, for example,
right.
Public professional indemnity, public liability insurance problems?
Basically, our contract requires all schools to have liability insurance. That's very cheap. It's basically Juku insurance. It's only about 10,000 yen a month. That protects against accidents and the like. I think it's important to realize that a franchisee is an independent business person, and they use the services that we provide. So they have the entire financial risk for their own business. However, as a franchisor, we have a reputational risk as well. Obviously, we don't want our franchises to fail. I think with any business, this if you open, say there was a chain of schools and they opened a new branch, and within 12 months, if they were still in the red, they weren't making any money after 12 months, it's time to pull the plug. You're probably not gonna pull that one back, and that's what we did with our school in Motomachi. We just had to close it down because it wasn't ever going to work. So there's risk for everybody. Obviously, as a franchisor, we want to run successful schools, so we don't want to be seen to have a string of failures. We want to point to our successes. So that's the risk from our point, the risk to our business reputation and our product and service reputation. People have done things with our IP that we haven't been too happy about in the past, but that's usually able to sort that out. But for the franchisees and individual, I would say do a business plan, run it past a franchisor, but run it past a lawyer or a business consultant as well. And how realistic is it? How realistic is your business plan? If you're a teacher owner operator, your biggest cost is going to be a rent. Your second biggest cost after that is probably going to be our admin fees. And then you've got marketing and utilities, and that's about it. So if you're looking to replace a teacher's salary, you want to earn minimum of 250,000 yen a month. You can add your rent and other expenses to that. You can look at the student fees and the makeup of the student body and work out how many students you need before you're going to get to that salary break-even point. It's not a very difficult calculation, but you have to be realistic about your location and your marketing efforts as to whether you're going to get those students or not. And if you can bring students from the beginning, such as ones you've been teaching privately, either at home or at their houses or in cafes, the more the merrier, really.
Okay, so moving on to, we've talked a little bit about the type of person and the franchise. That's hard to say, isn't it?
Franchisor, franchisee,
yeah. FF relationship, maybe we could say. So we could talk about location, because this is something we touched on with Peter and Peter Lackner and Ian Simpson in Japan also, and of course Dean Rogers a few weeks ago. Yeah. So their experience was different. Dean had a place, a few minutes from the station. Now, Peter Lackner would say that that's kind of with people working from home now, that, you don't have to be so near to the station. So tell me a little bit about
Well, it depends on what you want to do. I think that's the first thing. You'll be very, very clear about what you want to do. Now, you mentioned Dean again. Now, obviously, after they licensed Rosetta Stone, that isn't going to work. Well, that is a name that is known. It's a brand that's known in Japan because of all of the work that Rosetta Stone had done before Dean licensed it, And so having downtown locations makes complete sense for them. In Ian's case, I mean, he might be near the station, but he's in a rural location, I think. And it depends who you want to teach and what you want to teach them. If you want to teach business people, you're probably better off being where the business people are. Obviously, post-COVID, this is changing a bit. If you want to teach children, you're much better off being where the children are. And, of course, some families live in the city centre, but most don't. Most are in suburban or commuter distance from cities. And so you need to be sure of what you want to teach and then find out where those people are. And then you might find a great location. Then you need to look around the location, see what the competition is. The analogy I give is that, private language schools, Eikaiwa, are pretty much, it's a very, very saturated market, and we're pretty much in the same position as a hairdresser. And so if you open up a new hairdresser in a town, you've essentially got to close another hairdresser, whether that's by taking a fifth of your business from 5 separate hairdressers or closing down one other new hairdresser. You've pretty much got to do the same to open an English school in a saturated market. There are locations that will be untouched, and you might have a new town, new development, for example. There's no English school there, or you may find a location that people are moving to now outside of Tokyo. So if you look at places in Chiba and Saitama, people are moving out of Tokyo to live further out. And this is post-COVID because of changes in work-life arrangements. People then talk about the opportunities for online. Online certainly does open up some opportunities. And one of the opportunities it brings up is the fact that now you've got to compete with everybody else in the whole world. And that's not an easy thing to do, We ran up until about 6 or 7 years ago. We had an offering of lessons via Skype. And we had qualified teachers here in Japan, and we worked with a client supplier in the Philippines as well. And it's such a low margin business that it's a massive, massive volume business. We just didn't have the reach to get the volume to justify that. So online certainly provides some opportunities, but I think it's, for example, if you opened up a bricks and mortar school downtown in Shinjuku, you've got a lot of competition. Not only competition of other schools, but you've got a lot of competition for attention of your potential students. They've been distracted by lots of forms of advertising. That's more the case online, that there's so much competition online. Opening up an online school might be very, very difficult unless your products and services are very, very different to everybody else's. And in English language learning, I really don't think that exists.
And for anyone who doesn't live in Japan, talk about hairdressers. There are a lot of hairdressers in Japan, even in small villages. I think
there are. Yeah.
And dry cleaners.
And dry cleaners. Well. Yeah. Well, everybody needs a haircut and everybody needs clean clothes. The fact is that not everybody needs English. And this is possibly more interesting to people outside of Japan than it is. And in that, although it's a big market, Japan is the only country in Asia where there is no correlation between English ability and earning ability. So the type of English that parents want for their children, for example, would be very different possibly than they would in Spain or Romania or somewhere. I don't know where most of your listeners are. Where are most of your listeners?
Well, US.
Oh, really?
All over US, UK, Spain.
There's a big need for English in the US, right? But it's mainly ESL rather than EFL.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So what you went into a lot of areas there. We talked about time, of course. Yeah. Coming on to the third part was timing, and with COVID and coming out the other end, and we talked about online teaching, and this is something we've touched on with Rob Howard, and we also. I think with Dean as well, talking about, the Filipino schools. Yeah. When we say Filipino schools, is the teachers are all in the Philippines, aren't they? Like, for example, DMM. So for people who don't live in Japan or don't take English lessons online, it's what do people pay? Maybe 3,000-4,000 yen, which is about $30-40 a month for.
I mean, there's a huge
unlimited lessons.
There's a huge variety of different sort of offerings. Rare Job, DMM are probably the two biggest. Rare Job, it seems to me, they made no money for such a long time. They do now. They've turned a profit. A public listed company. Anybody can go and look at their results, but they made no money for such a long time, and they were initially really only a teacher-student matching service. Connect with your teacher in the Philippines via Skype and use a copy of side by side. It was basically what they were doing. So they were selling cheap lessons, but they were selling essentially as many lessons as you like in for 5,000 yen a month or something. But they essentially took the old Nova approach to this. So Nova, for those that don't know, used to sell a huge bunch of tickets up front, and the more tickets you bought, the cheaper they were, and then you could exchange your tickets for lessons, and you could take as many as you like.
Sorry, Simon, just stop you there. Sorry for interrupting you, but for people who don't know Nova, we just give you a little bit of background of the
Nova were and still are, I suppose, in much more reduced circumstances, a national chain school. Often derided, but not necessarily always fairly, I don't think. But so their business model was sell ticket packages up front and use those tickets to take lessons. And Rare Job were doing the same. I haven't looked at their website for a while, but they were doing the same. Now, Nova had something like a 12 or a 14% take-up rate on the tickets that they sold. So if you bought 100,000 yen's worth of tickets, you're only spending 12 to 14,000 yen's worth. And Rare Job were doing the same. So nobody's going to take 8 lessons a day. Well, 1 or 2 people might.
But some people, they binge, don't they? It's like, I want to take like 40 lessons in like a month or something.
But there'll be a very, very small amount, and some will take none. And I think that, seriously, the take-up rate for Nova tickets is somewhere between 12 and 14%. I would imagine that Rare Job is the same. So, even though it looks like you might get, so they translate that into their pricing as being 100 or 200 yen per lesson. $1 or $2 per lesson, which is not the real cost. But
it's interesting, isn't it? The 12 and 14 and the take up, because it kind of caters. I think we've all done this, studying, we want to study more Japanese or other languages. And for people who study English as well, it's always the people who are like, yes, now I'm going to like really do it. And there's kind of a mania, and you're like, I'm going to buy all these tickets, going to do all this. And then you're like, it's like a gym membership. Within a week, you're just that's it.
Or a Udemy course. I've got 2 Japanese Udemy courses still to complete that I bought last year.
Oh, don't remind me about Udemy
courses. That's what I should be selling, perhaps. But I think that's the thing with Rare Job, and that's how they got to their pricing of 100 or 200 yen per lesson. And there's just no way you can compete with that unless you have volume. So going back to Dean, he had his schools, he rebranded as Rosetta Stone. Then they got involved with Lincoln Motivation. They put them into all their centers. They got massive volume. And I think now that online is a bigger percentage of his volume than face-to-face in the classrooms. But they couldn't do that without Rosetta Stone and without the reach that they got through Link Motivation and their network. So massive, massive reach. DMM, for those that don't know, a pornographer turned English language school provider, they've got massive reach. Who knows what sort of English they teach in those lessons, but and Rare Job grew very, very slowly, and were in the red for many, many years. But they were obviously an early adopter. Timing, they were very early into that space. For us, for now, the online space is far, far too crowded for us to get into it. We provide a hybrid or an online service. We built this into our online scheduling system for lockdown, so people can take our lessons as hybrid or online if they choose to, but it's not something that we actively advertise because people will go elsewhere for cheaper options. And I never want to get involved in a race to the bottom, and I don't have the reach to get involved in a race of volume, the whole one coin English idea seems like a lot of work to me.
Okay, if a shout out to Tyson there, who I interviewed a few weeks ago. And if you want to learn about OneCoin English and this model, please listen to that podcast.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, when I say it, I mean OneCoin as the generic price point term, not referring to Tyson's company, which is a very good company.
So, can lessons learned in Japan, business in Japan, is there parallels, or can it be applied to other countries? I mean, you don't have schools in other countries, so it's unfair. So what kind of
not anymore?
Universe?
We did have a share in a school in Edinburgh.
I did read that. Sorry.
Yeah.
Also Taiwan as well. Is that right?
No, we work with people in Taiwan, but we don't have any schools there. So the Edinburgh school would be a fairly standard sort of school in Britain that was hit by a triple whammy, really, which was change of visa regulations, Brexit and COVID. The visa regulations had meant that the British government were no longer issuing essentially pathway visas. So people would go and do a year's study to get their IELTS or their TOEFL score up and then go on to university from there on a pathway course. But the government changed the visas so that, for example, people from the Middle East, which was a big part of the market, they would have to go back home and then reapply for their visa to get into university. Under Theresa May, the British government brought in these terrible restrictions on people entering the UK, and the environment of discord or something that she wanted to create. She certainly did it, and that meant that all of those students went to Australia or Canada or somewhere that wasn't so xenophobic. So that was the first thing, but it was possible to pivot then to providing summer camps, which is a big part of that industry as well. And that was, we were working with people in Taiwan, sending students over from Taiwan, and we're starting to cultivate relationships with Chinese providers as well. It's a huge business. And then Brexit comes along, and then COVID hits, and that saw off the Edinburgh school. Basically, unfortunately, it closed down, and we delisted the company. So that was a shame. For other private language schools, obviously, I know people in Taiwan who run schools. The difference in Taiwan is that they only go to school till about 2:00 in the afternoon. Bushiban is the name of the schools in Taiwan, which is equivalent to Eikaiwa. But the students of English in Taiwan will go 3 or 4 times a week, and they'll have a lesson with a local teacher followed by a lesson with a native speaking teacher. And the first time I observed operations in Taiwan, it's just like their English is just so much better than kids in Japan, who naturally, if you only get 50 or 60 minutes contact time a week, you're not achieving as much, And I think this, going back to what I was saying earlier on about lack of correlation between English ability and earning ability, it's not really taken seriously in Japan. It's taken seriously for, say, ACAN or entrance exams, but in terms of it being a skill that you're going to need in your working life, for most people, at the moment, it's not taken that seriously. So, private language schools are, for elementary school kids and up, are much in the same space as swimming and piano and other hobby activities, So in Spain or Italy, for example, the kids are going to benefit more by being able to speak English in their careers, no doubt about it. And I think people in China and Korea feel similarly. I don't know much about that, no. But, certainly in Spain, you wouldn't get a job if you didn't have a CELTA. Nobody would take you on. They all use Cambridge materials. They all take Cambridge assessment tests, and it's a much it's an industry that's developed in different ways, I think. So I've never run a school in Spain really, so I obviously can't talk about that. But if anybody wants to try, do get in touch. I would love to apply the teacher owner operator model to Europe. I would love to do that. We could have a call center in Europe and people running their own schools. That'd be great. We
have a good riff going on here because you're anticipating on my questions. So about your franchise in Japan, and where else are you? Just to mention again.
We only have schools in Japan at the moment.
Okay.
We did have one, sharing one in the UK. On the publishing side, we work in Japan, Taiwan, a little bit in China and the EU. And we're keen on building that out. I'd be very, very keen to speak to people who wanted either us to help them with franchising their schools outside of Japan, or for us to take our brand into countries outside of Japan. I would love to hear from people about that.
Okay, just pause for one moment on that, because we haven't mentioned it all, and we're kind of running out of time here. But as things go, but Happy Valley, your publishing company and your writing. Tell me about that.
Happy Valley came about because we didn't have a kindergarten course, and I really did not want to write one. We'd just written our in-house 8-level general English adults course. And so through a friend, I was introduced to Catherine Littlehale, who is in Japan and has a career here, has her master's in TESOL for young learners from York in England. And took her on for what I thought was going to be a short consultancy, so she could help put together a very young learners curriculum for us, kids up to the age of 6. And basically, through conversation with her, I realized that I didn't want an amalgamation of things that were available off the shelf. So we made Happy Valley, and it's brilliant. And so we used that. We tested that in house for a couple of years, and then we published that, I think, 2012. That's now licensed in Taiwan and the EU, and we're hopeful. We have been hopeful for quite a few years of something in China, but really quite hopeful at the moment. And that was a lot of fun. That was very creative. That was great fun. So I did the initial art direction on that, invented the characters. I wrote a lot of the music for that. I say music, it's just kind of little jingles, really. But that was
a racetrack in Hong Kong as well as in Happy Valley. Is that true? I remember that. Yeah.
It's a racetrack named after a cemetery in Hong Kong.
Oh.
There are lots of Happy Valleys everywhere. I named it after a place in Northumberland that we used to go to, having completely forgotten about the Happy Valley in Hong Kong. But there you go.
Yeah.
But that was a massive team effort. I think about 15 people worked on Happy Valley. It was a big effort, very big undertaking, financially and in terms of work. But it's paid off, and we're very, very happy with it.
Great. And I just want to about the future. So we touched on that, expanding your franchise. So there's a couple of things I want to about you and your future. And if you were starting out again, or for people who are looking to maybe expand their school, turn the school into a franchise, or become a franchisee, there's a kind of a cannonade of questions there. But yeah, so can you give me some tips?
If I was starting out again, I would have stayed in IT. I studied computer science at university. Didn't particularly enjoy it, but I enjoyed the problem solving. But the applications weren't particularly interesting at the time. It was kind of like payroll and that sort of stuff. IT now, runs the world. You can do anything you like in IT. It's I'm 53 now. There's no way I'm going to get reskilled in writing games in Unity or Ruby on Rails or something. I would have stayed in IT. That's what I would tell my younger self. If I was starting out now and I want to start my own school, I would certainly look at franchising. Absolutely, because it would just make things so much easier. Cut so many corners. That actually, cut corners is not a good way to put it. It would save you so much time, so much work. I think if somebody wants to do their own school on their own, they should get as much advice as they can from other people, with the caveat that, with all small business owners, which is what independent school owners are, everybody's got their own way of doing things because that's the way they want to do things. So it's not necessarily going to match what you would want to do. But in terms of timing, I honestly don't think now is a good time to open a new school. We don't know how COVID's going to play out in Japan. Is there going to be an Olympic strain or an Olympic wave? It seems inevitable to me that there will be.
Is there going to be an Olympics? Well, we won't go into that.
Well,
that's another podcast. Yeah.
And then, so just assuming you could square all of those circles, or do we circle the square? I can never remember. Location is going to be the thing that's going to determine whether you're successful or not. You've got to decide who do you want to teach and what do you want to teach them and where you're going to put it. You've got to do your location searches. And it's not as easy as the old adage used to be, like, go and have a look. Where are the elementary schools? Because that's where the students are. Well, there are lots of empty elementary schools in Japan as well, and the population is moving because of COVID. So it's not that simple. We do location searches, and we have ways of doing them. Which I'm not going to give away. Secrets
sure. Wouldn't expect you to, yeah.
And then, if you want to anticipate, I think if you want to anticipate what's going to be a more vibrant market in the future, I think you've got to look at general. If you're teaching children or if you're involved with children at all, I think you have to look at general provision of after-school care for children. That will involve English and other things. So many, for those that aren't in Japan, so many kids have so many after-school activities like piano and swimming and climbing, whatever else it is. The people that provide the one-stop shop that provides everything for double working families, of which there are many, many more than there used to be, even only 10 years ago, I think those places will succeed. You've seen, for example, like My Gym has become popular. If you could combine a gym and a swimming school and a music school and an English school and a climbing wall and do interdisciplinary stuff,
Ian Simpson has done something similar, hasn't he? Sport English, what he's doing, with the gym and the English. Yeah,
I don't know that much about that. I haven't spoken to Ian for a while, actually. He's often got a new project on the boil, Ian.
Yeah, I'm always talking to him about new stuff he's doing. He's always keeping up on things.
But I think those sorts of locations are going to do better in more densely populated locations. I mean, Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, that's where I would start those. But that's a massive, massive, massive investment to start something like that. But sure. I think those sorts of places are going to win. I also think there's a huge threat to the private language schools as they exist at the moment, as English is taught more in elementary school, for those that don't particularly need it. In terms of general English fluency, schools are going to be providing this before too long, which leaves us with test prep, ACHEM, and that's much better off being taught by Japanese teachers than it is foreign teachers, I believe.
Okay. Except for TOEFL, of course, for the people who will be attending the TOEFL conference.
The analogy that I use for that is that, I'm against testing generally, but that's, idealistic. I took my driving test, which is a very useful test to take because it allows me to drive a car. But nobody is born a natural driver. There's no such thing as a native driver. There are good and bad drivers, obviously, but driving instructors themselves didn't used to be drivers, learned to drive, passed a test, and then learned to become driving instructors. And those are the people that are good at getting people through the tests. And I think it's the same for academic tests.
Yeah, it's a good analogy, I think.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, excellent analogy, Mr. Blogger. But so the future about your franchise, we just kind of wrap it up.
We've been doing a bit of reorganization, and actually we would love to take on new franchisees. And we basically, if we look at, we've talked about branches. If we look at affiliates and franchises as well, we have 2 or 3 affiliates which are essentially schools that don't have the Modern English name but use our services, and we can save those people a lot of time and money as well. So we'd love to speak to people about that, and we'd love to speak to people about either converting their existing school over to an affiliate or a franchise, or employing our services. We have an online scheduling and school management system called Live Schedule, which at liveschedule.net you can sign up for free. And then you won't be able to know what to do with it. So get in touch after that. We'll help you set it up, because it's quite complicated. It does a lot of work. It essentially does everything except teaching and making the tea, really.
Now I know, because when you said send me your calendar availability, I'm like, I do the old system, but you're so far ahead with the what's it called, Calendly. I don't know. Calendly, I've used Calendly in the past, but it's kind of time zones kind of get. It takes a while to learn it.
Yeah, so Calendly we don't use. I mean, basically for my own stuff, for stuff like this, I just use the Mac calendar. But we have a thing called Live Schedule, which does scheduling and appointments and does makeups, and we can teach live via Zoom on that. It does financial stuff. It does CRM, marketing, all that. It's basically an online school management system. And so people can try that out free at the moment, and we'd love to hear from people who want to do that. We'd love to hear from people who want to expand. And if there are people overseas, not in Japan, I would love to speak to people in different territories about expanding Modern English outside of Japan. You obviously would need local knowledgeable partners to do that, but I believe a lot of the services that we provide would be transferable to other markets, because essentially, we put people into a classroom with a teacher.
Okay, and the website is Modern English, all one word, .net.
It is indeed, yeah.
And how are you contactable through the website, or what's
through
the best
through
way
the through the website, through my blog, which is moranactually.com. I'm on LinkedIn at Simon Moran. I'm on Facebook, although I don't look at Facebook a lot. And we have Emmy Learning is kind of our parent brand, so emmylimited.com, which is
EMMY, is it Emmy?
MEL limited spelled out.com. Yeah. But if you're feeling really brave and you want to talk about business, why don't you just drop me a line at my email, simon@modernenglish.net.
Okay.
I will not reply to abuse.
And you shouldn't. Simon, thank you very much.
It's been a great pleasure, Philip, to finally chat to you. I've prattled on, as I normally do. Hopefully I'll have said something of use to people, but yeah, welcome people to get in touch, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks for listening to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast with Philip Pound. For more great advice and resources, check out eflmagazine.com. If you found this podcast helpful, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. See you next time.